The rain had stopped. But the clearing still smelled of ash, damp earth, and something that never quite healed. The baby deer, now taller, steadier, stood trembling at the edge of the burned grove. Her hooves were muddy. Her breathing shallow. Across from her, barely standing, the bobcat's flank was bloodied. One eye swollen shut. His legs trembled, but his growl had softened into something else. She took a step forward. He didn't run. Not this time. Not after she had limped across fire and thorns just to find him. Not after he'd thrown himself between her and the coyotes. And as the fawn gently lowered her head, pressing her brow to his scarred cheek, the wild thing, once untouchable, closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. Because sometimes, love doesn't ask to be understood. It just stays. Before we start, if stories like this move you, make you pause, or remind you what love really looks like, then maybe it's time you joined us. We're building something beautiful here. Subscribe now, don't just watch, belong. The storm had passed, but the forest was still trembling from its memory. Wet leaves clung to every branch, the air hung thick with the scent of pine and mud, and the quiet was broken only by the soft, uncertain hoof steps of a newborn fawn. She was small, much smaller than she should have been for her age, her legs too thin, her coat still ragged with the remnants of birth. The rain had washed her clean, but it had also taken everything else, her scent trail, the warmth of her mother, and whatever fragile tether had once anchored her to safety. She moved clumsily through the underbrush, hooves slipping in the mud, head low. Her ears flicked at every distant creak or call. But there was no mother's call. No heartbeat to follow. She was utterly alone. And yet, something stirred nearby. It was the scrape of claw on bark, deliberate and slow. A shadow detached itself from the base of a tree, a shape so quiet it seemed part of the landscape until it moved. A bobcat. Young but not a kitten. Maybe a yearling, long-legged and lean, his muscles taut with caution. His fur was the color of ash and earth, with darker spots and those unmistakable black-rimmed ears twitching high. His name, though the forest knew it only in motion and silence, was Bran. Bran had been watching the fawn for several minutes. She wasn't prey. Too awkward, too loud. He didn't hunt fawns, not yet. Not unless he was desperate. But something about her stuck with him, her sheer audacity. Lost fawns curled up and disappeared. They didn't wander through bobcat territory, bleating softly, practically begging for attention. When her wide, wet eyes met his, she froze. He didn't. He simply blinked, slow, unreadable. The fawn stepped forward. Bran stepped back. She followed. He vanished. She saw him again the next morning. Bran hadn't meant to be seen, but the fawn had slept beneath a fallen pine just a few feet from his den, a shallow notch in the rocks hidden under twisted roots. He'd crept out to hunt frogs in the dew-wet grass, and there she was, staring at him again with those dumb, glassy eyes. She didn't seem afraid. Not really. Just interested. Bran hissed softly and walked away with the swish of his short, ringed tail. But she followed again. Her gait was awkward, her legs too long for her body, and her hooves clacked on stones. But she didn't fall behind. Not entirely. He tried to shake her by weaving through thick underbrush. She squeezed through. He leapt over a small stream. She skidded and nearly fell, but managed to cross. Eventually, irritated and hungry, Bran turned sharply and let out a snarl, not full of fury, but enough to say, "Stay away." The fawn froze, eyes wide. Then she lowered her head, not in fear, but in a clumsy, mimicked bobcat crouch. Her thin legs folded under her, and she sat, blinking at him slowly. As if to say, "I'll stay here. Just don't go." Bran narrowed his eyes. Then turned again. This time, he didn't run. He simply walked deeper into the forest. But he knew she was still behind him. Days passed. Bran hunted in wide circles, catching lizards and squirrels, and always she was there, never close enough to touch, but never gone. She didn't eat meat. He had noticed that. She chewed soft leaves and the tender bark of young birch trees. She drank from the same stream as him, waited until he was done, then stepped forward delicately. He tried ignoring her. He tried hiding. He even moved his sleeping place twice. She still found him. She didn't speak in words, obviously. But her body spoke constantly. It said, "I'm lost. I don't know how to be alone. I think you do. Can I stay?" And for reasons Bran didn't fully understand, he didn't drive her away. One evening, thunder rumbled again. Not a storm like before, but enough to unsettle the young fawn, whom the forest might have named Eloin, if it gave names. Eloin panicked at the first crack, darting and stumbling until she found the hollow where Bran lay curled beneath roots. She didn't enter, just stood near the entrance, shaking. Bran looked up, his ears twitching, his body rising. He didn't move toward her, but his presence alone was steady. He watched her from the shadows, not with affection, but with confusion. Why was she still here? Why was she choosing him? He wasn't soft. He wasn't kind. He was a wildcat, and barely surviving on his own. Eloin laid down in the mud, her legs tucked beneath her, her ears pinned back as thunder rolled again. Bran stayed inside. But he didn't sleep. Later that night, the silence returned. Rain had come and gone in soft drizzles. The moonlight returned in silver shards across the trees. Bran emerged from the hollow cautiously. The fawn was still there, shivering, her coat soaked, her belly rumbling with hunger she didn't understand. Bran approached her. Not close enough to touch. Just near. She looked up. And for the first time, he didn't walk away. Instead, he laid down a few feet from her, his back to her, tail curled tightly over his paws. It wasn't an invitation. But it wasn't rejection either. It was the closest thing to an allowance the forest had seen from him. And to Eloin, that was everything. The next morning, they traveled together, but not side by side. Bran led. Eloin followed. Always a few paces behind, her tiny hooves light on the pine needles, her head turning constantly to catch up with him. They were not friends. But they were not strangers anymore either. A bobcat with a shadow. A fawn with nowhere else to go. And in the heart of that dripping, waking forest, something ancient stirred, something that had no words, no logic. Just two young creatures learning how to carry the weight of being unwanted, together. But Bran was still wild. Still uncertain. Still ready to run. The next morning, the forest wore the hush of early light, dew on the leaves, a silver mist filtering through pine and birch, and no sign of the bobcat. The fawn woke slowly, still curled in the soft hollows of the grass where she'd nestled beside the creature she'd come to trust. But now the warmth was gone. The bobcat, Sable, was gone. Tula stood, small hooves unsteady, blinking through the trees. She made no sound. Just listened. But there was nothing. Her chest tightened in a way she didn't understand. Not quite fear. Not quite sadness. Just absence. Like a shadow that had left her body. And for Sable, running was easy. Running was instinct. He hadn't meant to stay the night. He hadn't meant to curl around the strange, gentle-legged creature that smelled like open meadows and warm milk. He hadn't meant to care. He padded far from the clearing, muscles flowing through underbrush, paws silent over fallen needles. Squirrels scattered at his passing. Jays heckled from the canopy. The scent of pine pitch was thick in the air. He leapt onto a low boulder, looked down over the valley below, and exhaled. He'd almost let her follow him. That was the part that scared him. 2 days passed. Tula waited. She slept where he had lain, nose tucked into her side, ears flicking at every sound. And then, finally, a scent. Familiar. Faint. She rose fast. A sound near the edge of the woods. A rustle. She didn't think. She ran. There he was, limping. A snare had caught Sable's leg somewhere near the lower valley. Not one left by humans, but an old, cruel vine trap used by foxes to catch birds. He'd stepped in it in the night. It had tightened and cut. He managed to tear it off, but his paw was bleeding. His gait was uneven. His eyes were dull. Tula didn't notice the wound at first, just the shape of him. The way the light touched the curve of his back. The ripple of fur she had come to know. She galloped to him, no hesitation. And for once Sable didn't move. Didn't vanish. He lowered himself onto the cool earth with a grunt, breathing shallow. His pride demanded distance. His injury forced stillness. The fawn, relentless, naive, settled beside him as though no time had passed. As though his disappearance had been a blink. She pressed her narrow head against his shoulder. He flinched, but only a little. That night, the pain in his leg worsened. The muscles pulsed with fire. He hissed softly through clenched teeth. Tula didn't sleep. She stood watch over him, legs folded underneath her, head up, ears twitching at every cricket and crackle. The wind stirred the trees. A light rain tapped down through the canopy. Tula tilted her head to shield him. She didn't know why. Only that he was hers. And she was his. When dawn came, Sable opened his eyes to see her still beside him. Her breath visible in the cold air. Her gaze fixed on the treetops, as if waiting for the world to speak. He tried to stand. Collapsed. Tried again. She nudged under his ribs, helping. Together, slowly they moved. She walked ahead. He followed. But the wild in Sable wasn't so easily broken. As his strength returned, so did his need to pull away. The wound scabbed. The limp softened. And one crisp morning, while Tula was nosing through mushrooms near a fallen log, he vanished again. This time he didn't look back. He went north, past the granite ridge, into the black pine hollows where the wind sang between stone arches. He climbed. He hunted. He forgot. For 3 days. Until he heard the cry. A soft, dry bleat carried by the wind, panicked and alone. Not a cry for food. A cry for someone. Tula had followed. But not well. Her hooves were not made for stone or slope. She had slipped, somewhere along the shale-lined ledge, and fallen. Not far, but enough. She lay there, breathing fast, heart hammering. Her leg bent under her body awkwardly. A shallow cut marked her jaw. She was too frightened to move. When Sable appeared at the edge of the slope, golden eyes fierce, she didn't lift her head. She only blinked slowly, ears still. His chest ached. In a way claws couldn't explain. He descended fast, sure-footed, tail tight to his body. When he reached her, she made no sound. He nuzzled her side once, then again. Then circled and lay down beside her. This time, he did not leave. Night came. Then morning. And still he stayed. When Tula woke, the pain in her leg had faded to a dull ache. She turned her head slowly toward him, startled to find his face so close, his eyes already watching hers. Sable did not run. Instead, he licked the wound on her jaw gently, like a whisper. Tula exhaled. Far below, the forest glowed in the amber light of dawn. A fox darted between trees. A heron flew low across the marsh. But atop the ridge, nestled in the hollow between stone and pine, a fawn and a bobcat, creatures never meant to cross paths, lay together. One learning not to run. The other learning to wait. And both learning something else altogether. Something not taught by instinct, or fear, or survival. But by the quiet. By the staying. By love. The sun rose with a kind of tension that even the wind could feel. It came too fast, pushing shadows into the underbrush, burning the cool out of the forest before it even had a chance to settle. Branches creaked dryly in the breeze. The leaves, once supple and green, curled at the edges like old paper. Even the birds seemed to know something was wrong. They stayed low, wings tight to their sides, and made only half-hearted calls. The bobcat, now known only to the fawn as Rye, had not returned since the last chase. He'd vanished again into the deeper woodlands, slipping into the thickets of brush like he always had when things became too close. For days now, the fawn, Linnet, had been on her own again. She grazed quietly near the stream, twitching at every sound, half expecting the soft pad of Rye's paws to come out of the silence. But instead, the world answered with heat. The fire started on the far end of the valley, sparked by a lightning strike no one saw. At first, it was a whisper, just a curl of smoke over a hill. Then it grew. The grass hissed as it blackened, the shrubs crackled like bones snapping in the heat. Birds burst from the trees in frantic squadrons. Deer began to move, first slowly, then en masse, herds evacuating ancient trails they had known since birth. Lynette smelled it before she saw it. The bitter edge of smoke hit her nostrils and made her freeze mid-chew. Her ears rotated like radar dishes, locking onto a distant rumble. She turned toward the mountains, where the sky was no longer blue but the color of bruised copper. The horizon shimmered with orange. Her hooves shifted. She hesitated. Where was he? For all her innocence, Lynette knew enough to understand danger. But it wasn't herself she feared for. It was Rye. He had always hidden away in the densest patches of trees, places now directly in the path of the flames. She bolted. Her hooves sliced over pine needles and dry soil, carrying her straight into the direction he'd once vanished. The smoke thickened as she ran. Birds screeched overhead. Rabbits darted across her path. A buck charged past her in panic, but Lynette held course. By the time she reached the edge of the ridge where Rye had disappeared days ago, the air was dense and hot. The trees here had already begun to sizzle at the edges. Heat coiled up the trunks like invisible snakes. Her chest rose and fell with quick, frightened breaths. She called, not with words, but with that soft throat sound that only fawns make when they're small and scared and searching. A sound Rye had once pretended not to hear. This time, he heard it. He emerged from beneath a low-hanging juniper, his body smudged with ash and soot. His coat no longer gleamed golden but had dulled to a dusty tan. His eyes were sharp, wary, but they locked on her instantly. She froze. So did he. For a second, they just stared, one animal carved from gentleness, the other from sharp edges and instinct. Then Rye growled, not to threaten but to warn. He bared his teeth and snapped at the air, jerking his head toward the far trees. Go. But Lynette didn't move. Rye growled again, louder. He advanced a step, trying to shoo her with his body. The flames behind him were close now, their light flickering on the dry bark. One caught a branch just feet from him. It burst like a torch. The noise made Lynette flinch, but still she didn't run. And that's when something strange happened. Rye stepped forward and nudged her, not harshly, not with frustration, but with something like urgency mixed with concern. He circled behind her and began pushing her gently toward the trail she had come from. He was guiding her. Every few feet, he would glance back toward the fire. His tail lashed with agitation, but his body stayed beside hers. At one point, a fallen log blocked their way. Rye leapt over it, then turned and encouraged her with soft huffs until she finally scrambled clumsily over it too. It was the first time they moved together, not as predator and prey, but as companions in crisis. Smoke followed them like a second shadow. Trees fell behind them in cracking screams. At one point, the trail split. Rye paused, sniffed the air, then darted left. Lynette followed without question. They ran side by side for nearly a mile before the smoke began to thin and the fire's roar became a distant growl behind them. They emerged onto the bank of the river that fed the sanctuary lands. The trees here were untouched, the water cool and fast-moving. Lynette stumbled to the edge, trembling with exhaustion. Rye stood beside her, panting, eyes scanning the treeling. And then he did something she had never seen him do. He lowered himself beside her, not in readiness to flee, not to rest with suspicion, but to sit beside her, eyes half-lidded, body open. A soft breeze passed over them. Lynette, her legs still shaking, inched closer. Her nose touched his soot-covered shoulder. He didn't move away. The fire had not just burned the forest. It had seared something into both of them, a recognition that ran deeper than instinct. She had chased him for days, a creature made of light and affection. And he had resisted. But today, when she ran toward the flames, not away, he finally saw her for what she truly was. Not a nuisance. Not prey. But someone who would not leave him behind. The clearing was quiet. No birdsong. No wind. Just the sharp scent of pine needles and the lingering haze of tension clinging to the underbrush. Salas stood stiff beneath the overhang of a fallen cedar, ears flicking back and forth, her breath shallow. Her leg had stiffened from the run. And still, she waited, eyes locked on the treeline. Wren hadn't returned. Every instinct in Salas's small body wanted to charge back into the brush and find him, but she couldn't run like she used to. Not after the stampede. Not after the gash on her thigh had reopened during her dash to follow him. The wound throbbed now with every heartbeat. She lowered herself slowly to the ground, curled her limbs inward, and pressed her face into the soft earth. The bobcat had gone to protect her. Again. And this time, she feared he wouldn't come back. The sun had long passed its peak by the time Wren reappeared, emerging from the undergrowth with a limp. His left flank was matted in dried blood, a slash curving down from shoulder to chest where the badger's claws had connected. His breath rasped as he walked, slow, deliberate steps, but his eyes were bright. Salas let out a sharp cry and limped to meet him. She rubbed her face against his neck, then stopped. She stared at his wound. He stepped back. But this time, she didn't let him. Salas pressed her forehead to his chest and stood there. Just breathing. Just being. Wren didn't move. Didn't run. Something shifted. For the first time since they'd met, Wren followed Salas. The next morning, when she limped across a shallow stream to drink, he crossed with her. When a pair of raccoons rustled in the brush, he didn't vanish. When a raven called from above and Salas bolted, spooked from the sudden cry, Wren stayed near, circling her until she settled. This quiet companionship became their rhythm. Still, Wren never slept beside her. Never let his guard fully down. But he was there. And that mattered. One evening, Salas stood in a field of tall wild grass, her eyes closed, her fur catching the gold light. Wren crouched nearby, tail twitching. She moved with a grace that made no sense for her thin legs. She seemed to dance with the wind. He watched, transfixed, as if the fawn had become something else, something untouchable. It terrified him. He turned and ran. Days passed. No pawprints. No scent. No bobcat. The clearing felt emptier than ever. Salas didn't eat. She barely drank. At night, she lay curled in the spot where he used to watch the stars. Then came the storm. The clouds cracked open with a vengeance that sent birds fleeing and foxes diving for cover. Wind lashed the trees sideways. Rain poured in sheets. Salas tried to shelter under a thick cluster of pine, but it wasn't enough. The thunder rolled closer, and the flashes of light were too much, blinding, deafening. And then, lightning struck a dry log near the edge of the glade. It exploded in flame. The forest ignited like paper. Salas froze. The memory of the fire from her early days came rushing back, the cries, the heat, the smoke. Her legs buckled. She staggered, tried to rise, failed. Somewhere behind the fireline, something leapt through the smoke. A blur. A growl. Wren. He lunged through the flame, claws skidding across wet bark. His body slammed into hers, pushing her up, nudging her, growling low and constant. She didn't resist. She let herself be moved. Guided. Protected. Together they ran, not fast, but with purpose, through ash and steam until they emerged, coughing and soaked, onto the banks of the river. Salas collapsed. Wren lay beside her, breath coming in shallow, wheezing pants. His ears were singed. His fur smelled of smoke. But he was here. And he hadn't run. The fires eventually died. The skies cleared. The forest healed slowly. So did they. Wren never left again. He still walked alone at times, still disappeared into shadows. But he always came back before dusk. Salas no longer waited in fear. She knew now, some wild things were meant to be near, not held. She stopped trying to tame him. She just stayed close. One morning, Wren approached her while she drank. For the first time, he rested beside her, touching fur to fur. A soft breeze stirred the clearing. And as the sun rose, the bobcat and the fawn stood side by side, not as opposites, but as echoes, two creatures stitched together by accident and wildfire and the strange, stubborn rhythm of love.